Thanks for being here. We appreciate it. As we come to the waning days of the Biden administration, where across the globe could you point and say the United States is safer because of what we did here?
Well, I'd start by saying our alliances are stronger than we found them 4 years ago. They're stronger than they've been in decades. NATO is more powerful, purposeful, and bigger. Our alliances in the Asia-Pacific are at all-time highs. And our adversaries and competitors are weaker across the board. Russia's weaker, Iran's weaker, China's weaker. And all the while, we kept America out of war. So I think the American people are safer, and the country is better off than we were 4 years ago. And we're handing all that off to the next team, as well as having the engines of American power humming, our economy, our technology, our defense industrial base, our supply chains. So the United States is in a stronger, more secure position, and our competitors and adversaries are weaker and under pressure. I think that's the main handoff that we will make to the incoming team.
You talked about how America is not at war, at least not in a hot war right now, and it's true that no more Americans are being killed in Afghanistan. The U.S. has withdrawn. Obviously, Afghanistan is one place the U.S. did not leave in a stronger position, the country of Afghanistan itself. In the chaotic withdrawal, we lost 13 U.S. service members. Today, the Taliban is firmly in charge, once again stripping away women's rights. You heard Senator Katie Britt talk about the resurgence of ISIS-K. According to Washington Post columnist David Ignatius, you offered to resign in the wake of the withdrawal operation. Is that true?
Well, I have kept my personal conversations with the president private for 4 years. That is the job of National Security Advisor, and I'm not going to change up in the last week. So I can't tell you what I talked about with him personally and privately. What I can tell you is that the United States of America is definitively better off that we are not entering our 25th year of Americans fighting and dying in Afghanistan.
Well, let me ask you this then. Did you feel responsible? Did you feel personally responsible for the failures in the withdrawal?
I think the entire team, the entire national security team, has responsibility for everything in our national security, and that includes me as the National Security Advisor. I also believe that the strategic call President Biden made, looking back 3 years, history has judged well and will continue to judge well from the point of view that if we were still in Afghanistan today, Americans would be fighting and dying. Russia would have more leverage over us. We would be less able to respond to the major strategic challenges we face. And just to the point that Senator Britt made before, we have not seen, although the investigation continues, any connection between Afghanistan and the attacker in New Orleans. Now, the FBI will continue to look for foreign connections. Maybe we'll find one. But what we've seen is proof of what President Biden said, which is that the terrorist threat has gotten more diffuse and more metastasized elsewhere, including homegrown extremists here in the United States who have committed terrorist attacks, not just under President Biden, but under President Trump in his first term. And that is part of why we had to move our focus from a hot war in Afghanistan to a larger counterterrorism effort across the world.
Let's talk about some unfinished business. Between Israel and Hamas, how close is anyone to a hostage deal?
Well, I can answer that question in two ways. We are very, very close, and yet being very close still means we're far, because until you actually get across the finish line, we're not there. We have right now President Biden's top Middle East advisor, Brett McGurk, in Doha. He has been there for a full week, hammering out with the mediators the final details of a text to be presented to both sides, and we are still determined to use every day we have in office to get this done. Can we get it done before the 20th? It is possible, but I certainly can't make any predictions that we will. I will say President Biden is getting daily updates on this. He is likely in the near term to engage with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and we are not, by any stretch of the imagination, setting this aside. There is a possibility this comes together. There's also a possibility, as has happened so many times before, that Hamas in particular remains intransigent.
October 7th was obviously a huge intelligence failure, mainly the Israelis' intelligence, but also our own. Here are you in September 2023 before the Hamas attacks.
And the Middle East region is quieter today than it has been in 2 decades.
8 days later, Hamas attacked Israel. Hezbollah began ramping up its rocket fire into Israel. The Houthis joined in, firing missiles from Yemen. What did the Biden administration, the Israelis, the West miss about Iran's readiness to go at Israel on all these fronts, Hamas, Hezbollah, the other militias, and the Houthis?
Well, first, Jake, you cut that clip pretty well, because the sentences before it, I said this could change in an instant. This could change tomorrow. because that's always true in the Middle East. What I was noting was that at that moment in September, you didn't have the kinds of hot wars and other upheavals that you'd seen in the previous 2 decades. But I noted that there were 2 things in particular we had to be concerned about. One was Iran, and the other was the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So we were focused on trying to bring solutions to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And part of the solution we were looking for was moving down the track of normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia as a way to get Israel to move on the Palestinian file towards a 2-state solution. Obviously, that was disrupted in a very severe way by what happened on October 7th, but we moved immediately to support Israel, to stand up for our friends and partners in the region. And if you look today at where we are, Iran is at its weakest point since 1979. And you also see the fall of Assad showing just how weak and distracted Russia is as well. So there is a huge opportunity now, alongside the very real risks that remain, for the new administration to work towards a brighter future for the Middle East.
We're coming up on the 3-year mark since Russia invaded Ukraine. Trump said a meeting is being set up between him and Vladimir Putin to discuss ending the war. What does a good deal look like versus a bad deal for Ukraine? And doesn't any deal necessitate, in order to get Russia out, ceding some land?
Well, first, a good deal involves Ukraine making decisions about its territory, its people, and its freedom, and not having decisions imposed upon it by the United States or anyone else. Second, a good deal means that after the war is over, it doesn't start again a few months later because Russia just picks up where it left off. That requires some degree of security commitments from the West to Ukraine.
NATO troops in Ukraine?
Well, there's a number of different ways that President Trump could go on that front, and I can't obviously predict what he will do. What I can say is that at the NATO summit last year, President Biden brought all of the allies together, and they collectively said Ukraine's future is in NATO. The question is, what kind of bridge can we build from here to there? How does that fit into these negotiations? Those will be the things that the incoming team will have to grapple with.
The New York Post coined a new phrase for Donald Trump's foreign policy aspirations in our hemisphere, the Donroe Doctrine, taking all the way from Greenland in the north and Panama to the south for the U.S. Does this make sense strategically?
Look, I've heard his comments on Canada and the Panama Canal and Greenland. I don't have enough information to assess what he actually has in mind. And also, I think there are enough armchair quarterbacks out there. I certainly have been subject to their opinions. I won't, sitting here today, be an armchair quarterback on what President Trump intends to do in this regard.
Your successor, Florida Republican Congressman Mike Waltz, has told Breitbart he has asked for and expects the resignation of every intelligence official detailed to the National Security Council at noon on Inauguration Day so he can fill those vacancies with those who share the new president's agenda. How unusual is that? How disruptive could it be?
Well, first, I've had very good substantive engagement with Congressman Waltz. He is very well informed. He is focused on the issues. We're trying to have as smooth a handoff as possible, especially on these significant issues in Ukraine and the Middle East. And that has been working in a very professional way. I saw his comments in Breitbart. He and I have not talked about this. I don't know what he's actually going to do, so I'll reserve comment till I see. The one thing I will say is that the professionals who make up the National Security Council staff, they're not political. They come from departments and agencies across the government, from the Defense Department, the intelligence community, the State Department, and they serve the country and the Constitution. They don't serve anyone's particular political agenda. That is to the good for America's national security.
And finally, President Biden set to give a speech tomorrow from the State Department about foreign policy, about the Biden years. Can you give us any sort of preview what his final message will be?
Well, he's going to ask the question, is America stronger than we were 4 years ago? And he's going to answer that question with a definitive yes. Our alliances are stronger, as I said before. Our enemies and competitors are weaker. We've kept the nation out of war. Every element of American power is stronger today. And if you look around the world at every other significant country, they're looking at the United States in 2025 and saying, damn, I wish we were in their position. Because the U.S., alone among the major economies in the world, is dynamic, powerful, propelled with very good friends and with adversaries and competitors under pressure. That's the legacy. That's what we're handing off to the next team. President Biden will elaborate that and also talk about the future, the technology revolution, the energy transition, how we're set up for success on those, but the work has to continue, and that's what the next team will have to carry forward.
Jake Sullivan, National Security Advisor today. Congrats.